Greetings YouTubers, and welcome to today's video, which features this gem right here. Maybe not directly but indirectly, as you'll see in just a moment. I was perusing eBay looking at vintage amps and found this gem. Now I have seen Art Deco cabinets used on radios where it rounds here around this corner and then rounds over there, and then it has these horizontal silver stripes and just extremely Art Deco styling. But I've never seen an amplifier that had it. So I decided I had to have this thing. I just fell in love. And then I looked at the price they were asking. Now bear in mind, this is an untested, as is, God only knows what's inside amplifier. And they want $700 plus $50 for shipping. And after I recuperated from my stroke, I climbed back in the chair and sent them what I thought was a reasonable counteroffer, which was half what they were asking. And they didn't even have the decency to respond. So I decided, the heck with them. I'll build my own version of this amp using this style of cabinet with some differences in decoration and layout and things like that, and then build my own amp chassis inside, and probably end up spending $850, but at least I'll have the last laugh. The main problem I foresee in this project is this is a solid metal cabinet. Now, working in wood is one thing, but trying to work in metal, welding and joining pieces of sheet metal is not an easy task. But fortunately, having worked on old cars, as you well know, I have sort of some experience in this. So I'm going to try to put it to use to build my own version of this just, I think, magnificently designed amplifier. Now it's probably going to take 2 videos to do this, but if you sound like this sounds like an even tolerable project that you might be interested in, then grab the popcorn and about a 6-pack of beer and sit back and let's follow the adventure as Uncle Doug tries to replicate the eBay Art Deco amp. Jack, you long cat, are you hiding under the carpet? Swish your tail if it's not you. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So to get the metal to make the Art Deco cabinet, I went to the neighborhood metal yard where they offered to sell me a full 4x8 sheet of cold-rolled steel for an ungodly amount of money, or I could get a remnant piece of the hot rolled. It has this ugly mill scale all over it and is hard to work with. So I thought, well, let's go with the remnant, and so I'm back just like I was with the Tremaverb chassis, working with 16 gauge hot rolled steel plate, which is not a fun thing to do. But anyway, let's quit moaning about it and let's get started. Those of you familiar with my normal building style with regard to amps and cabinets know that I generally just start building with minimal drawings or plans. But in this case, since the material being used is steel plate, I thought it might be best to create a scale model, and in so doing get my templates to cut and form the steel by. I've scaled down the overall cabinet size a bit from the Thorderson, which was 8 inches tall, 8 inches deep. I kept the same 14-inch overall length, but I thought it just looked nicer to have it be 7 inches tall and 7 inches deep. Not so bulky, not so much like a pressure cooker or something like that. These rear panels are essential structurally, but they definitely restrict the width of space that I have to insert the chassis from the rear. I may end up having to insert the chassis from underneath or figure out some sort of inlets or something on these to permit a wide chassis to pass into the cabinet. These are the types of considerations that come up when you build a model like this, and it's very, very helpful. This open top area here will be a very fine steel mesh. It's steel of the same gauge as the cabinet, but with just thousands of little holes drilled in it, so there'll be plenty of heat ventilation. I may well use the same material for the back. That way there can be circulation through to keep the tubes and all from overheating. Then as an added feature, I'm thinking about cutting a small hole here on the side and welding in a piece of the same perforated steel that I'm using for the top and rear, and then put a computer fan over here in this side section to circulate air over the tubes and transformers. Now to cut the metal, I'm not going to use the standard methods of saber saws or cut-off wheels, things like that, like I've used in the past. Instead, I'm going to rely on a much more up-to-date device called a plasma cutter. This one was made by Miller, and the way it works is you see the copper tip of the gun here, a arc will be struck between this and the metal, and then about 90 psi of air will be blown into that heated area and blow the metal away, making a real clean, we hope, cut. I'll set up the camera so you can watch it happen, and then I'll show you the end result. That sound you hear in the background is the air conditioner compressor from my house, and it's going to come on and off from time to time. Okay, I've made the mark here where I intend to cut the metal, and I put a straight edge there that has a little thickness, about 1/4 inch, to help guide the tip of the plasma cutter gun. Okay, here we go. Okay, and this is the cut edge, okay? It's going to take a little bit of filing and cleaning up, but as you can see, that was really quick and simple, and a pretty darn good straight edge. Okay, here we go. Okay, and here's the rough cut, and you can see it's not all that rough. Nice straight line, a little bit of slag on the back. I'll just have to kind of touch this up with a file, and it will be a finished piece. Then I'll make masonite models of each of the other pieces, C-clamp them down, and we're going to cut out all the pieces we need to make our amplifier cabinet. Now that the pieces are all cut out, it's time to do the bending. I'm going to use this big aluminum rod as a form for the bend. I have used the hydraulic press to press it down at exactly the point where the bend should start, and now I'm going to lift up here and wrap the metal around the aluminum rod, hopefully. Okay, looks like a successful, nice smooth bend, proper radius, and now the left side of the cabinet, as you're looking at it, is perpendicular to the front of the cabinet, which is just what we want. Okay, so now we have the radio front, the wrap around the left side, and we've got that cap that matches the radius here of the bend around the side. Now I have the right side bent, and it fits up real well. Now we need to put in the rear walls, both on the left and the right side. Okay, all of the panels have been cut and bent, and now it's a matter of bead blasting and welding this together. I cut a 3-inch hole in a piece of that 1/4 inch material I'm using to guide the plasma cutter. torch and then used it to cut the vent hole in the side of the amp cabinet for the cooling fan. Okay, here's the right side with the ventilation fan installed. You can see the little grill screen there that's been put in place, and back here is the 12-volt DC fan. Now that creates a little problem in that it will have to have its own power supply. So I'll put in a small 12-volt transformer and a full-wave bridge rectifier to give it the voltage that it needs to keep our little amp cool. Well, now before I start welding, I just thought I'd put the right side in place here. You can see the ventilation grill and fan. We curve up here, and then this will be our top ventilation grill. Now it's going to fit underneath the metal, so it's going to look a whole lot nicer, sort of like it's framed. Okay, so that's the way it's coming, and I think it's coming along pretty well. Okay, next up then will be to weld this into place. I've also cut out and fit this rear grill. Once again, it will fit inside the metal and be framed in sheet metal. So there ought to be plenty of ventilation. Just a brief word here on the method I'm using to connect these pieces. I'm using a MIG welder and then stitching on the inside along the seam, and then on the outside lightly grinding and smoothing so that we end up with essentially a perfect closed seam. Okay, now this metal, because it has this mill scale on it, has to be cleaned very thoroughly before you can weld at all. And even then, my welder does not particularly like this metal. Okay, it's hard to strike an arc and it gets a little messy. So these aren't the most beautiful little spot welds in the world, but they certainly work. Okay, so that's how it's done. It would be preferable to use a TIG welder and do a nice smooth low heat seam down here, but I just don't happen to have one handy. Well, I'm at that stage of the game here where it's time to lay out the control panel. So I use those really nice dials that a viewer sent me and laid out 5 pot controls here. It'll be a volume, bass, treble, and then being the tremolo hound I am, will have an intensity and speed tremolo. I'm thinking of using a Vibrachamp chassis for this that I'll build from scratch. Right now, though, the main project is building this cabinet, and it's a lot harder than I thought it would be. Up here is the kind of a pretty slick looking little pilot light, and then I made this sort of Art Deco design, aluminum design here to go behind it, and also on the back will be at the bottom will be for the power cord. The fuse there is on the right, and on the left will be the on-off switch. I'll also have to add, I'm thinking over here for the inputs, because I don't want to disturb kind of the symmetry and simplicity of the front. Then on the right side of the rear, I'll have the 4 ohm and 8 ohm speaker outputs. See what you think of this little styling addition. I got some aluminum strips and wrapped them around the left side here in Art Deco fashion so that it kind of fills in this side and leaves the control panel pretty well centered from about this point over. Then I'll have that little aluminum embellishment here right around the pilot light. And here's the screened ventilation port in the right side of the cabinet. I put in some recessed head stainless steel screws holding the ventilation fan in place. I've come up with a much better way to bend 16 gauge steel. First you attach a straight edge like this piece of oak right here just to the left of the bend line. Then you scribe that line using the oak as a straight edge guide, and with your cutoff wheel remove say about 1/4 of the thickness of the steel. Now this takes a gentle touch to do it. You don't want to cut through anywhere. Then you'll find that the steel will bend a whole lot easier and give you a lot squarer angle right here at this point of bending. Now that I have this nice straight scribed line, I'm going to clamp this piece of steel in the vise with this piece of tubing right along the line and this piece of tubing directly behind it, and then when I tighten down the vise, this will make sure that the steel breaks along a straight line. You can see here the piece of steel is firmly clamped between the two pieces of square tubing with the scribed line exactly coinciding with the top edge of this front piece of tubing. Now I'm simply going to grab a hold of the top part of the steel and bend it down toward me. And now we have a nice 90-degree bend here that's got a fairly sharp radius and no hammering and no drama. It's just a matter of bending it down uniform. Those of you who remember the Tremoverb chassis making will have to agree this is a whole lot simpler than what I went through with it. Well, here's the chassis ready to go into the cabinet. Of course, once I build the amplifier, I'll have to do all the machining for the tube sockets and mount the transformers and things of that sort, but it's ready to go and it fits the cabinet very nicely. I changed the design so that all the primary circuitry goes right through this block, and then there'll be an inlet on the back of the cabinet that fits down over this, so that when you pull a cabinet off you don't have to undo your primary wiring. Also up here at the front we've got this flange with the holes to mount the 5 pots for the tone, volume, and tremolo. Underneath it's cleaned up and nice and shiny, and it's ready to be machined for the amplifier. And here's the cabinet. I primed it with flat black so I could see all the flaws and try to rectify them. You can see where the fan will fit in here, the 5 pots, and the indicator light. Up here is that perforated grill that is going to let the heat escape. And over here there's some holes for those 3 wraparound aluminum strips. Okay, here's the rear. You see that opening I have here for the primary wiring, which will be the fuse, the toggle switch, and the AC cord that will come into the chassis. And this allows the cabinet to be removed without having to undo all that wiring. There's a grill piece that fits back here. I'm going to put it in just a second. I'm also going to install the chassis in here so you can see how everything fits together. Over here are the speaker outputs, and I still have not decided where to put the input jacks. So that's something I'll have to come up with before the next video, I guess. Well, let's put all this together so you can see how everything fits up. The chassis has been now inserted up through the bottom of the cabinet. You see that flange that was at the front of the chassis lines up with the holes in the front of the cabinet, and the pots will screw down right through those holes and secure the chassis to the cabinet. And you see how the rear of the cabinet fits down over that primary wiring block. These will be the 2 screws here that not only secure the rear of the chassis to the cabinet, but also hold the vent screen in, which I'm going to put in right now. That rear screen now has been inserted, sort of like a guillotine blade, into slots in the cabinet. It comes up, and then it is secured to the chassis and to the cabinet with just 2 number 6 screws. Now we're looking down into the chassis pan where all the circuitry will lurk and do its job, hopefully. For those of you who fear the electrocution potential here, if you curl your fingers underneath, I'm going to make a wooden base, I think, something with like some nicely routed molding that shows and that fits along here and covers the circuit and all the high voltage to eliminate any sort of hazard. Let's take one last pass here around the completed cabinet. I think I'm proudest of how these seams came out. It's so tricky when you're trying to bring together pieces of sheet metal and you're welding on the inside, and to not warp it or discolor it, and then to have the seams fit up so nicely. I'm really proud of that. I also like the overall design. It's as Art Deco as it gets, and will be even more so with the 3 aluminum strips on the side and then that little embellishment there. Probably go with chicken head knobs, and I've got a real snazzy handle up here for the top. In the part 2 video, I'm going to construct the amplifier using this chassis. I'm thinking of building a VibroChamp circuit, which is fairly simple, and they sound great, and it's got tremolo. So if that sounds interesting, I hope you'll stay tuned for part 2, which should be out in a while. I've got some customer amps to work on, so part 2 will be delayed for a few days, but I guarantee you I'll do everything I can to make it worth the while. I also wanted to express my gratitude to all viewers who take the time to watch my videos. I really appreciate it. I'm also particularly appreciative of those who have become Patreon patrons or PayPal contributors. As usual, I'll have links in the video description that will assist you if you would like to join them in helping to support this channel and to keep it not only on the air but advertising free. So with that, it's time to take a drone flight and then bid a fond farewell until we meet again. Bye for now.